What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and boy, do we have a special guest. Geoff Smart is in the house. What's up, Dr. Geoff Smart?
Oh, good to be here, Darius.
Oh, man. I'm so freaking pumped to have Geoff Smart here. Hey, is it Dr. Geoff Smart or can I do Jeff? What do you like?
You can either call me Dr. Smart or Jeff, but I prefer you call me Jeff, Darius, if it's okay if I call you Darius.
Yeah, my dad calls me Darius, but most people call me Darius. So
Darius. Okay, all right.
You flip the coin on that one.
Are we going to bring up daddy issues if I call you Darius?
Shit, no, we can't go there.
I'll call you Darius then. All right, Darius.
Yeah, that's awesome, guys. So I met Jeff 19 years ago, Endicott House, year one, birthing a giants, and I'm like this little peewee dude. My business maybe 5 million in revenue, which is for the 30, 40 employees, just getting my freaking teeth kicked in, like literally like pummeled. Who's leading this is my good friend, Vern Harnish, and this is the last class he led before he moved to Spain, and so Vern is leading the class. And all these guys are talking about scaling up and top grading, and lo and behold, one of our speakers is Jeff. And I took 35 pages of notes, and I was like, oh my God, I'm doing everything wrong when it comes to hiring my people. Now, fast forward. By the way, I went back to my office, and tried rolling this thing out, which was a lot. If you're like a novice entrepreneur, that system's like that's a big thing to do if you're young and inexperienced. But do you know the guys from Nurse Next Door? Do you know
No.
John DeHart?
Nope.
And Ken Sim?
Mm-mm.
Oh shoot, they were huge. Well, Ken's now the mayor of Vancouver, but they were like hardcore top grading guys.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I remember when Jeff was at BOG, he was like super animated. He was by far one of the most interesting speakers, and I fell in love with him and his work. And so I started following him around. And fast forward, I don't know, it was like 10 or 11 years later, I'm at GOT back at the Endicott House, and he's there, and we're talking who, and I remember the moment he tells the story about Fork. Fear of reference check, and some dude punching his boss in the face. And I was like, it was like falling in love all over again. But anyway, Jeff, I was like, man, one day I'm going to have a podcast. I'll have Jeff come on. We're going to bullshit about all sorts of things. So here we are, my friend. Thank you for coming.
I'm so happy to be here, and we have so many fun topics that we can talk about greatness. So I am all yours. It's a great pleasure to be here. Congrats on your arc since 2005 through serial entrepreneuring and now private equity and podcasting. Congrats on all your success.
Yeah, likewise. And so before the show, I was telling him that all of a sudden the past week, we started talking about, his name has come up multiple times. And I didn't realize that his work is such a big deal in private equity because I'm newer to private equity. But we'll be talking about that in a second of the show. Now, for those of you guys that have been living under the rock, actually, if you listen to this show, I would talk about who all the time. I'm like, yeah, like you should like people sit there and bitch about the fact that they can't hire, and then I'm like, well, what's your hiring process? And then they tell me what it is. And, if you can't enjoy a beer with them, you shouldn't hire them. I'm like, yeah, that's one part of it. I'm like, and I can't wait to get into this with you. But I'm always like, my perspective, and you taught me this, was I'm like, I'm trying to figure out what the hell they're not telling me, And so I'm going to give your formal bio, and then we'd love to get into your origin story just because you've done so many cool things. But I always say, like, hey, like, how'd you get there? Like no one was born, working with Peter Drucker and killing it with Fortune 500 CEOs. But first and foremost, guys, Jeff is the founder and chairman of GH Smart, bestselling author and leadership and hiring of the books such as Who, the A method for hiring, Power Score, and Leadocracy. And he's a PhD in psychology and studied under Peter Drucker, as I mentioned before. But like I said a moment ago, Geoff, we'd love to hear your origin story. How did you get to where you got to, man?
Yeah. All right. So there's a 3 hops, skip, and a jumps. I have to give a huge shout out to my first mentor and my father. I mean, Brad Smart. So he was an industrial psychologist. I was growing up. He had a kind of a one-person show where he was really good at advising CEOs. Like he was Jack Welch's hiring, firing, talent advisor, right? Jack Welch of GE, for those of you under the age of 50, was the kind of celebrated CEO who really pioneered a lot of the methods around building talented teams that we talk about today in the world. So I kind of like if your folks were dentists and you want to be a dentist and you become a dentist, like obviously that was a huge leg up. First step was just being aware of this field. Which I liked because it combined psychology, that's the study of human behavior, and business. And you put the two together, it's like kind of cool, right? So anyway, I was early on exposed to that through family stuff. And I did go study with Peter Drucker on purpose. So I sought him out. I went out to Claremont to do a psychology PhD, and he was in the business school. And this is the guy who coined the term culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
So he was like all about get the people part right, and you will build an impactful company. You'll make money. You'll be a successful entrepreneur. So my origin story was like, all right, I'm going to go study this formally. I did a big. This is important, actually. This is how I launched Geoff Smart. My PhD dissertation study. I went and got Henry Kravis to get me data. Henry Kravis is the founder of the buyouts industry of KKR. KKR is like,
oh shoot,
yeah. Right. So he's like the OG, like private equity titan. And he had donated buildings at the place where I was doing my PhD. So I called him up and he was like, I'll go short on this, but like basically his assistant was gatekeeping me and wasn't going to let me talk to him or ask for data. But he eventually, I got through to him. He gave me data. It was really interesting. I got 75 other private equity firms to give me their data. I found that if you apply these principles of how to evaluate people and interview people the right way, you make better bets on people, and it actually turns into financial returns. So I'm 23 years old. Boom, pop out my my little Geoff Smart shingle, and I become an expert focused on how to help people who run or own companies make better people decisions. My grand plan was just to finish school, work at a consulting firm, and then maybe one day, start my dream company. But I just went for it, and not like people were like, oh, that must have taken so much courage. It didn't at all. I had no kids then. I have 9 kids now. Back to that. I had no wife. I had nothing. I had a roommate. We surfed. We, went to class, and I also had a company. So I had very slow growth in the early days, but it really picked up. And today we have 200 people in 6 countries. We did a little over 100 million in revenue this last year. No debt, growing about 20% a year, having a blast. But it's the origin story was basically like the 3 steps were, being aware of it through family stuff, studying it academic, like spending years, like really, really, truly studying my little niche, and then having the courage to launch the business and just make mistakes and figure it out along the journey.
Wow. That's funny. I was looking, and this was probably like when I was building the list of folks I want on the show. I'm like, man, I want to connect with Geoff, and I went on your website, and I did realize you guys were like a global organization.
Yeah, we're like legit. We beat McKinsey and Bain at best consulting firm to work at last year in 14 categories.
Congrats, man.
I don't know. We're like, I love culture. I do, like my Peter Drucker influence, right? But like giving people a kick-ass place to work where they can make an impact, they can be treated well, they can make money, they can have more freedom than they might otherwise get, and then they end up obviously like scoring your culture high on Glassdoor or other places. We're number 1 on Glassdoor out of 70,000 peer companies in the field of consulting. That feels good as an entrepreneur. Some entrepreneurs love the tech, they love the product, they even love the customer thing. I'm a people first entrepreneur. I love building a platform where the people can do well and they just like working there.
Yeah, no, I'm likewise. I'm I'm a culture warrior. I think like
Yes.
what came out of like your work and like what I really love about at least the who work, which is where I
Yep.
spent most of my time and even on top grading before that, which is like, all right, man, how do I get the right person in here so I don't f up my business? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
And so I obsessed about that. I'd love to ask you a question about that because
Go
one
for
of
it.
the things I ended up doing was I wrote a book called The Core Value Equation, which is
Mhm.
how do you operationalize your core values in your business.
Great.
And I that was the thing that I geeked out on because I was like, all right, man, if I get the values right, then I can like filter for the people I hire. I can and like really do it in like an authentic way, not like the bullshit like Enron, we have integrity as our number two value. Like what is the true core values of this business? How do I overlay that on top of my operating and hiring mechanisms?
Yeah.
And then test through the hiring process to make sure that they, as best as I can figure it out, and you don't always get it right, that this is really a true core value match. How do you think about that when you start thinking about the hiring process or the who
I think that's
process?
super cool. Tell us all a little more about how you kind of stumbled upon that, because I think that's I would get, honestly, I would give 1% of entrepreneurs and big company CEOs, government leaders that we've advised or work with credit for explicitly caring about core values and hiring for it. So how'd you arrive at that as something you thought was a high priority?
So you know, it's a long story about like how like for whatever reason it resonated for me. I don't know if have you been to Austin ever? Austin, Texas?
Love Austin. Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, so there's a famous barbecue place here called Franklin's Barbecue. Are
Okay,
you
I don't know if
familiar
I've
with
been to
it?
that one. I don't know.
So Aaron Franklin's like the number one pit master in the United States. He's
Wow.
like Obama and like Anthony Bourdain would go eat barbecue at his place.
Wow.
So I bring that up because he lives 2 doors down from me. And I had lunch with him once, and he's like, this guy's on like Food Network. He's a famous dude. And I said, well, hey, Aaron, how did you get into barbecue? And he said, you know, Darius, I didn't find barbecue. Barbecue found me. And I hated the answer. And then I went and read an Esquire article about him, and it was kind of true. But
Yes.
I always say that in that, like, I don't, you know, I didn't find core values. Core values found me. I really, they resonated for me in a deep way for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So I started geeking out on it. And, you know, I'll tell you this. Honestly, it was loss aversion. I hated firing people so much. I
Yeah.
get so much anxiety around firing people.
So
And
we're-
the first person I ever fired, I was probably 24 years old because I started my first companies in my 20s. They told me I'm not fired. Like they looked at me.
They like refused. They thought it was like a suggestion.
They were like, "Yeah, I'm not going." And so like I had like 3 in a row like that were
Yeah.
really bad, where they like
Yeah.
basically were like told me to fuck off and that they weren't fired.
Yeah.
And so I
Wow.
was like, either I'm really bad at firing, or I'm, you know, or I need to figure out a new way. And so anyway, I bring all that up, and that I hated firing people a lot. And so I was like, look, I really want people to love their work. And I came to a few conclusions on core values. I think most organizations, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think most organizations, they just kind of like, they do the discovery process. They figure out what they care about, and then they throw them on a piece of paper or on the wall, you know, words on paper, words on wall. And then they kind of just go back to doing their thing. And then whatever's happening around them, all of us as individuals have our core values, you know, that becomes the real core values in the organism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, right.
And they don't necessarily match up, right? And then
That's right.
and then there's a discrepancy, and then that causes fracturing, and then the people say, "Oh, this is bullshit," and then you have this like kind of fractured culture, right? So I went a different way, and I was like, you know, like, dude, you are what you are as an organization, and organizations have a personality, and like core values don't have to be nice; they just have to be what they are. And
Real.
I believe that core values have the opportunity to become the language of the organization. They just have to be actually designed. So my whole thing was, you have to design them so that they're easy to use and true to the organization, and design them in a way such that they can be viral and sticky in the organization. So I built like a design system around it, and then I overlaid it on top of all these systems. One of which, the first most important one, is hiring, because that's the first time they come into the system.
For sure.
So
yeah, hey, I think it's so cool. I'll geek out with you for a sec. I've got my company's core values framed on my desk, brother. Framed on my desk. It's real. Here's how we came up with our core values. Around the time you and I met, around 06, Harvard Business School had tech startup cases that they teach their MBA students, but they didn't have any professional service firm startup cases. So they contacted us, and they're like, "Hey, can we study you for a year? And then like teach your case. So I was like, yeah, cool. That sounds great. So I was thinking this was going to be a positive experience and it was a negative experience. So I'm in front of a bunch of Harvard MBAs. They're talking about my company, Geoff Smart. What did we do well? What could we have done better? And the professor said, to this one woman, would you work at Geoff Smart? She said, no, I wouldn't. And I was kind of like, what? And she said, you know what? I worked at the Peace Corps at one point in my career. And she said the Peace Corps was very clear about what it stood for. And I don't know. She goes, I don't know if it's just the way the case was written or whether whether Geoff Smart doesn't know what it stands for. But I bet you Geoff Smart hasn't even bothered to write down, why it exists and what it stands for. And I was like, we hadn't written it down yet. I'm like, you're right. So we spent a year and a half as a firm coming out of there. I wasn't embarrassed. I was like inspired. I was literally like, okay, right on. Of course you should write down what you stand for as a business and should chunk out into, actual value. So we spent a year and a half doing it. Everyone in the whole firm contributed. We talked to Johnson & Johnson about how they created their credo, which is this beautiful document about here's what we stand for, here are our core values, and it's real and it's different and it's like its own thing. We talked to the Navy SEALs, who we did some volunteer work. They have something called the ethos, and we asked someone who wrote the Navy SEALs ethos, like how did you all do that? And that one was a cool, weird story. I think this is public information. I'll just this is how they did it. They put a representative group of people, high and low in the organization, on a helicopter, and they sent them to San Clemente Island with like just raw meat and beer, and said, "Don't come back until you can tell a story that is unlike any other organization on the planet that reflects who we are and what we stand for."
Wow.
Like that's how they wrote it. So we whatever we did it in boardrooms, and it was like very civilized over.
No raw meat.
Yeah, no raw meat. It was it was like, but it was fun, and I really feel proud of it. So our and then we'll geek out on hiring too. But it starts with knowing what you stand for, so you can really select the right folks. Our credo begins: we exist to help leaders amplify their positive impact on the world.
Yeah,
and that thing took like forever to hone, and then there's a longer part to it. But I'll tell you, I think there are 5 things. I'm going to read your book. I'm going to buy your book because I love this stuff so much. I think there are 5 ways that entrepreneurs can make the culture actually fit your core values. One is who you hire. I think that's the most important one. You hire the right people who are diverse, come from different backgrounds, for sure. But they shouldn't be like counterculture or counter to what you stand for, your core values. 1, who you hire. 2, what you tell them to do. Scorecards from the Who book. Hey, I was at an EO conference, a big one. And I asked, hey, who has written goals for everybody in their company?
Right.
10% of the people raise their hand. I'm like,
totally. You're
missing it, everybody. 90%, you're missing the boat here. You got to write down what you want people to do. They want to know what you want them to do. Anyway, that's how you can also manage and craft the culture. Like, do this, not that. Both outcome-based stuff, but also the values-oriented, here's what we expect you to do. 3, how you pay people. Can you imagine if you want teamwork, but you pay people for being individuals? I've been through some phases of our evolution where we pay people too early on for being individuals, and we're freaking out about why isn't everyone working as a team? And it's like, well, you're like, and there's a famous Harvard Business Review article called "Rewarding A While Hoping for B." And I think that takes away that that sort of core value ethos. The 4th one, I think, is training. Like, hey, if there's some values that you can train folks on them. And then 5th and finally is just like structures or org charts, just the more like, meeting design, all that kind of stuff. So if you get all that right, if you first care enough to write down what you stand for, what your values are, and then you're really careful on each of those 5 things, you can, I think, really let your culture have a powerful, living, breathing, sort of role in helping you grow and scale your company. But you got to get the hiring piece right, and firing too. Whenever I hate firing people so bad, it's so painful. But there's not. I think making a smart firing decision is worth 3 times making a smart hiring decision around culture and core value. Living the values and all that in your company.
Yeah, it's so interesting you said that. You're saying that. So the way I thought about it in my words, I said, look, there's really like three assets you have in your company outside of like a balance sheet, and it's cultural assets, strategic assets, and execution assets.
Sure.
And everything sits on top of the cultural asset, right? Like that's like the foundational block of it. And I love what you're saying about firing, because if you get it wrong hiring, it's going to be painful. You'll figure out who you're working with sooner or later, right?
Right.
But when you're firing them, one of the things we did, and I was a big I was like the 9th rated highest CEO in Glassdoor in America.
Saw that. Right? That's incredible.
Thank you. And the reason I got that because I cared about culture, but we did the hardcore. This is a business I built from the ground up to 200 million in revenue in like 3 years, right?
Wow, that's fast growth.
And 1,000 employees from 30 employees. Like that's hard to do, right? You break a bunch of times going up there. But one of the things we did, I'd love to get your feedback on this, was I was like, man, it is a mortgage business, so it's real cyclical and it's a lot of turnover. And I was like, man, when we send people, look, if this isn't the right fit for them, we got to help them get out of here in a really like thoughtful and elegant way.
Yes.
And a lot of it was like really just like making it painless when they left. Yes. And it was like what I said was, I was like, look, we have to take responsibility for the fact that we hired them.
That's right. Take responsibility for it. That's right.
Like did we do all the right things, and did it not work out? And look, there's bad levers, and I'm not talking about those, but let's just talk like normal levers where, hey, it didn't work out, you're not performing, we have high expectations, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we got to make it painless for them. We got to make sure we take care of their family, and we should help them find a job. Yep. And if we do that, then hey, listen, we can wipe our hands clean saying, hey, we did the right thing. So I that was my approach, and it worked. It didn't always work out perfect, but it worked out pretty well. Like, what are your thoughts on that from like a leaving? One more thing on that. Yeah. One more thing I'll add was being really clear about why it wasn't a cultural fit and getting them out, because the people that stayed needed to know that we cared about the culture that much. So those are a couple of things I thought of. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, right. Right on to all of that. So we've interviewed 30,000 executives, successful ones, unsuccessful ones, through all this assessment stuff we do when we help companies pick the right people. Of everyone we've ever assessed or worked with, the number one best firer I've ever met had a little routine that worked. I'll share it with you because it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about. And good for you for being super respectful to folks and taking responsibility. Hey, it was our hiring decision. It was our mistakes. You don't want to make people's lives horrible. It's already disruptive enough when folks have to find a new job.
Totally.
This guy who is really good at firing people actually didn't fire the person, but he'd say this. He'd say, hey, look, Darius, things aren't working. They're not working, right? I mean, you seem like you're stressed, or it's not, you're the bottom quartile of the sales group, as so, but you know what? I'm willing to work with you. But every Friday, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I want you to be honest with me in answering them. All right. And the 2 questions are you having fun working here? And can you picture yourself being successful? And he goes, and he looks right in your eyes, and he goes, and if the answer is yes and yes, I'll keep working with you till kingdom come. Okay. But if you feel like you're not having fun here, and if you feel like you don't really picture a path to success, I want you just to go start looking for something else. You can keep working here, but go look for something else and find that place where you can have fun and where you can be successful. And man, this guy was actually very aggressive about his hiring standard and driving his, public company CEO, former entrepreneur, like really went the distance. But he was so respectful around those conversations, and people would usually go 2 or 3, 4 weeks and be like, all right, I don't know. Honestly, I feel so bad. I'm underperforming. I'm not having fun. All right, look, hey boss, I'm going to go start looking for something. He'd be like, that sounds good. And when you find something, we'll throw you a going away party. And I mean, he was just like so cool about it. And I think that's great. I think, we're all people. People's identities are tied up in their jobs. And if it's not a match, it's not a match. You absolutely do not leave someone in place who's not a match, who's being, miserable, who's being a problem culture-wise. You got to get them out, but you can do that in a respectful way.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that because it's human. It's like, look, man, like nobody wants to go to work and hate their job. Nobody. I don't care. And like, that's just, and I would always say that to folks. I'm like, look, like, there's nobody's like, I'm going to show up and just be mediocre. They might do that when they're disengaged, but they're not doing that. Like they really want to give a shit and like their job and try hard and get pats on the back. Like that's what people want, you know? So I love that. That's so smart.
Everyone's an A player at something. Right? I mean, like the trick is like, if it's not this, hey, you're not like a ruined human being. Like for gosh sake, find the thing you're good at, find the type of culture that's a match. Maybe you can make more money, maybe make less money, but like for gosh sake, everyone's an A player at something. Go, find your path to that.
It's funny. Like so you guys coined the term A player, right?
Yeah. I mean, we did, I guess. I honestly, it could have been my dad quoting Jack Welch. Like, I'm not exactly sure, but it's like decades back. But yeah, we've popularized the idea that there are A's, B's, and C matches for any job. And the trick is to try to hire the A's.
So let me ask you a question, because me and my partner, we're always talking about A player. My former partner, we were talking about A players all the time. And one of the things we were like, A players hire A players, D players hire D players, right?
It's so true. Oh my God.
So tell me your thoughts on that. I'd love to, obviously you guys were all about A players. I'd love to hear
hallelujah.
that.
I'll tell you the positive version of it. Monica Zeller from my company is an A player. She's just great. She does great work. She's like a consultant at our company. And we were talking about trying to hire the first more senior person in because of culture, we always were a promote from within. We didn't really want to do that, but we had too few people in like in Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area. We're like, we are really underrepresented there. Let's bring in like a heavyweight. And she's like, oh yeah, you should hire Rents. And we're like, oh, Rents, like what, why? And she's like, oh, he's the highest rated person at McKinsey. And he runs technology, media, and telecom out of San Francisco globally. And he's like, I don't know, the best person I've ever worked with. And we were like, oh, that sounds pretty good. So we call him Rents, and he's like, okay, maybe. And then he flies out here to Denver. We're walking around the park for 3 hours talking about life and like meaning and like what he really wants and stuff. And our whole team, put the full court press on him. We hired him, and he's great. But like, we wouldn't have known about Rents, if it wasn't for Monica, who's amazing. So yeah, I think that A players hiring A players thing, it's such a compounding effect because they're all their networks. You hire one more A player, they know 1,000 people, right? I mean, so all of a sudden you have this like compounding effect where you really can bring in amazing people and scale your business versus if you have your B and C type folks who are just not a good match. They could be perfectly good humans and perfectly good at maybe some other type of work or something, but it's gonna be the wrong cycle when you have a bunch of B players around recruiting other B or C or D players.
What do you think? Like you just had me thinking about this, like, because and this is just an observation of since I've gone into more of an institutional business, having grown up in startup and more entrepreneurial businesses, I think that there's a different standard of what an A player is in an entrepreneurial business versus a more like institutional or more like corporate-y business. What do you think about that?
A guy named Steve Cakebread, and it like two thoughts come to mind. Cakebread like the wine. Yeah, that was his grandparents, I think, had the winery, in Napa, Cakebread. Right?
Yeah.
But this guy's claim to fame was he took 7 companies public as CFO. Okay, so like that's his deal. So he had a book called something like the IPO Pipeline or something. I read it a few years ago when I was thinking like, all right, long term, would we ever want to take our company public or not? So I get to like page 4 of this thing, and this guy is so compelling. He's so good at what he does. I mean, he's so enthusiastic about it. I call him up, like I'm like walking. I'm like text, Google searching like I find his email, like email him. I'm like, will you talk to me? He says, sure. So I get him on the phone with Geoff, the CEO of my business. So I'm the founder and chairman. Different person named Geoff is the CEO. And we were listening to this guy talk. He's like, hey, look, in building businesses, it's like you're from entrepreneurial stage on, you're going to have teams that are great fits for different stages of the business's growth. And he's like, it is absolutely impossible to start a business with one team and like take it public with the same team. Like it just doesn't happen and shouldn't happen because the business is a different business, when it goes through these different stage gates. So I think the A player for entrepreneur land, when you're like 0 to 5 million in revenue, the person's like super hungry, maybe earlier career generally, or you find someone who's, more experienced, who's pretty excited and can actually survive and thrive in an entrepreneurial environment. But you're probably looking at, pretty hardworking, scrappy, gritty founding team. Okay, cool, because that's all you can afford, by the way. High risk reward tolerance, all that. And then by the time you're cooking along with 100 million, 200 million, revenue, and you're institutionalizing, you're trying to get people who can come in and bring analysis and and management discipline and all that. It's like a different animal. So I think that's right. It gets talked about a little bit, but I guess in the A player, B player, C player vernacular, we say people have a tendency to slide down the alphabet as you grow your business. So just know that. And the antidote to that is you can narrow people's roles, or you can, it's like a mutual collaborative thing. Like, hey, you were doing 4 things, 5 things, but you're really good at one of those things. Do you mind just doing that one thing? And if people are like, no, I don't want to just do one thing. Fine. Then they want to move along. Or they might be like, yeah, great. Oh, I can spend all my days doing the thing I'm good at that I love. Okay, cool. So as you get, grown up as a business, people can really specialize or hyper specialize. But yeah, I'm with you. Like it's just different profiles and skill sets are needed for different stages of growth. And just to be aware of that and plan for it, anticipate it. I mean, I think I see the best entrepreneurs meeting people they kind of can't afford yet, or they sort of like, you don't need one of those yet, but you're meeting them and you're getting to know that type of hire, so, when you need that person, you can like call them up and bring them in. So yeah, that's fun. I always love to ask anyway, like who are the next 2 or 3 key hires you're thinking about making? It's most people don't think about that. They're just like busy doing their thing. But if you're really thoughtful about, who do I need for this stage? What are the really key strategic priorities? What are the operational challenges? Who do we really need now? And then to go meet a whole bunch of folks who are good at that and find the needles in the haystack who are willing to come work for you at the comp level you want. Boom. That's a greatness pattern recognition thing I see with entrepreneurs who really go the distance.
Yeah, no, that was actually the secret to my success in my last business. Was I was like constantly looking for who are the A players in the industry that whose work I respected, and like as you grow, like to your point, like going from 10 million to 50 million to 100 million to 200 million. This is where I got to. There was just people that were great at 50 that like struggled in their role at 150. Sure. And so I was like, and I would always give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, okay, look, let's just try to make it work. And then and I'm like, no, I can't, I don't want to manage you. Right. I need you to teach me new stuff. Yes. And that was my litmus test. That was my litmus test. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's right. And it takes entrepreneurs are weird, fellow entrepreneurs, right? The guys and gals out there who build something from nothing, we're a little bit of a different animal, you and I. But there's something here where you want to aspire to have bold goals, really like we're going to just build this thing, build the best darn whatever it is. And the humility to be like, I don't know how to do, finance and accounting to the degree to which this business needs. So finding people who are smarter than you in those important functional areas is just key to it. But somehow I don't know that comes naturally to most people.
No,
I think that I want to hire people like literally smarter than me in areas. And then like, why would people say things like young entrepreneurs tell me things like, why would they work for me then if they know more than I do? It's like, oh, because they respect that you've got the vision and maybe you're a product person and they're not a product person, but they're a key role player. Or, I don't know, like, why should they work for you? I don't know. Can't fully answer that question. But the point is, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to survive or die based on who you hire as you build your business. So get used to the idea you're going to want to hire people smarter than you in those areas.
Are you familiar with the Stegan Institute? Rand? Rand Stegan?
I'm not familiar with it. What are they?
It's like about? It's a conscious capitalist, like leadership development program. It's in Dallas. It's pretty cool. I think you and Rand should know each other. You guys would get along. But I studied there. I found out about it through Gathering of Titans. There's a lot of people, and like all of John Mackey's executive team at Whole Foods did it. My class is now that Jason Buchler is the CEO of Whole Foods was in my class. But it's pretty cool. And anyway, they have a saying in Stegan, which is as goes the leadership goes the organization, right?
That's right.
So it's like one of those things where I'm like, hey, things are bad in your organization. As goes the leadership goes the organization. Hey, you have a problem in this department. As goes the leadership goes the organization. So to your point, like if you want to build a massive or a big success or an institutionalized business, like you're not going to do it by learning it if you haven't done it yourself. More than likely, you've got to bring in people that have done it and be a good people manager, like
it's
be
like,
a good
who
leader.
can I get to do this? Is an instinct that successful entrepreneurs have. I need to do this as a fool's errand.
No.
And it's in the Who book, we say this like, stop chasing the what, meaning like trying to do that work yourself, and instead solve the who, which is exactly the point you're making, which is, success goes to leadership, goes to the organization.
I want to talk about Who, because that literally is probably one of the most popular books I refer to people. And what I loved about the book most was really this, like the fork is my favorite tool. I
think it's officially torque. And to give credit where credit's due, that was a Brad Smart invention of that word. My father, who's still alive and kicking, and awesome if he's listening to your podcast, Dad, I love you. But yeah, it's the threat of reference check. It's the idea.
Shoot. I rebranded it. I've been rebranding it Fork for a while.
Fork's fine. That's cool. That could be your thing.
Fear reference check.
This is like, what you do is, rather than ask someone like, hey, what's your weakness? And they tell you, oh, I work too hard, or some like made up weakness. Instead, you set the trap. It's an accountability trap, and it's real though. You say like, hey, what was the name of your boss in that job? And then you tell me like, oh, her name was Jane Thompson. And then the fun thing is like, write the name down.
Yeah.
Sorry, but how do you spell her name? Is it Thompson? O-N or E-N? Okay, got it. And you write the boss's name down. And then you say, hey, what was it like working with Jane? And then the person will say, yeah, actually, she was great. She gave me freedom to do this and that, but she wasn't so great at this. And you go, okay, cool. At some point, if we move to the next step in this hiring process, I'd love your help lining up some reference interviews, if that's okay. And the person says, yeah, that's fine. And say, great. So when I talk with Jane, what's she going to say were your strengths and weaknesses back then? Brother, that is like such a powerful way to gather such useful info, because they look at you too. They're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I can't give you my, canned answer. I got to like think back. But we've really over the years gotten some of our very, very best data, and entrepreneurs for sure do too, in these interviews where you're really talking about, what bosses are going to say about them. And then, of course, you can verify that with actually talking to Jane and doing the reference check. But having people reflect on what their strengths and weaknesses were for every job and what every boss, would say about them is a wonderful indicator about how they're likely to show up at your company.
Yeah, so I'm telling you that when you were at GOT and you gave that story, and then I went and bought the book and I read it, and I'm like, this is done. And I was hiring a lot of people. My biggest month, I hired like 140 people in a month. So I'm like, guys, we gotta get this right.
Yes,
And so, can I give you some feedback of things that happened to me when I did it?
That sounds fun. Yeah.
So first of all, I did exactly what you just said. And I would but I didn't do it all straight up. I would kind of like do it and then go back to some other stuff and then come back to it at the end when I had the references.
Yeah.
And what I would tell people on my team, I'm like, listen, I don't want them to give me their list of best friends who are going to vouch for them. Like that doesn't teach me anything at all. Yes. I said, I want to know who their references are, who they're not willing to give me. Right. Yes. And so, a couple things happen. Number one is I got the weird look. Sometimes they get super uncomfortable. They'd qualify their behavior a bunch of times. Yes. And I was like, dude, and I got people to spill the beans on themselves like in ways you would never expect. Telling me, talking shit on their bosses, all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So the best part of the whole thing was what I started finding was a lot of the times they would like not be willing to give up their like how to get in touch with them. They would totally like Heisman me right then.
Huge red flag, right?
Total red flag. Then the other thing I found was I would say, well, why don't you, and I'd be cool about it. I'm like, well, I haven't talked to him in like 10 years, like maybe can I get back to you on that? I'm like, yeah, sure. Dude, they ghost me. They wouldn't, I wouldn't hear from them. So I found that is, by the way, by audience, I swear to God, I think it's one of the best tactics to figure out if people are legit or not. Me personally.
It's a really good one. Another fun, like advanced interview one here as you're doing, and the Who book has a few different interviews. Like, what do you talk to someone about when it's your first time talking to someone? We call that like the screening interview. What do you talk to someone about when they're like a finalist and you're about to like bet big dollars and big compensation dollars and bring them onto your team? We call that the Who interview. And towards the end of it, when you're trying to evaluate their performance in like the previous job or like a very relevant recent job, I call it the three P's are really helpful. So you're asking people about what you accomplished. Don't just take bland, vague answers. Be like, oh no, like specifically, like what are you really proud of that you got done in that job? And then you ask them the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps were, how did your peer group do? And they might be like a senior salesperson, they might be like a finance person, and they'll be like, oh yeah, actually, I had this one Oracle sales manager tell me that he said, oh, I did great. Well, okay, you did great. Like, how great? And he's like, yeah, I made President's Club that year. I go, yeah, okay, cool. Like, what percent of your peers made President's Club? And he said, yeah, like 90%. I was like, okay,
real high bar there.
90% of your peer group. All right, that's So versus peers, I always try to find a benchmark. Versus peers, how'd your peers do? Okay, good. Next, versus plan. So you're hiring some product manager, someone who's well, what was the plan? Oh, I was supposed to sell 2 million. Well, okay. Well, how much did you sell? All right, I sold 3 million. Oh, great. How'd you do that? Or I was supposed to sell 2 million. What'd you sell? Well, I sold 500K, but excuse.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So really find out what they accomplished versus peers versus plan, or versus like even previous year. So like if someone's a consultant or a salesperson or a mortgage salesperson or really any production kind of role, like, oh, okay. I was running the Western region for the US. Okay, great. Like what, how much revenue did you do in your first year? Oh, we did 13.5 million. Oh, okay, great. Like what was it the year before you were there? Oh, it was 5 million. Oh, wow. Okay, great.
Pretty good.
Right. Or, we did 13.5 million. Well, what was it the year before you were there? Oh, it was 28. Oh, okay. It shrunk then. Well, so what happened? So getting real facts about what they accomplished and, versus plan versus peers versus previous year is another like great little tactic for really getting to the truth.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you're benchmarking them against like where they should or shouldn't be, right? That's so smart. So I have a friend who, Rick Gerard, he has a podcast called Higher Power. We've geeked out about your book together. Cool. He does a thing in interviews. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but which he calls derivative questions.
Okay.
And so he'll do a thing like, do you consider yourself lucky? And the reason he asks that question is that he starts to get their mindset out of it. So if they say, no, I don't consider myself lucky, this is a person that probably may have a negative, like personality. Well, why? And then you follow up with why do you not consider yourself lucky? No, they might say like, I don't believe in luck. I just believe in working hard, which is actually a pretty good answer. But it's asking them the question and try to figure out, is this a person that is a half glass full or half glass empty person? Because most people are not going to say, are you a half glass full or half glass empty? Oh, half glass empty all day long. Don't ever say that, right? So he'll do the derivative questions that I didn't know if you guys have used that or if you're aware of that.
Less experience with that. We're open. We have like a method, and it works great. So we're like preaching that. It's not the only way to interview people or get good data and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think more about that. The fun where people are revealing a mindset and then giving examples of their behavior. I think that's like very safe territory where that data is useful because they'll be like, oh yeah, I do feel like I'm looking like here's how in this last job that manifested into behavior and performance and stuff. Where you want to avoid, and I'm not saying your friend was in this territory, but you want to avoid territory that feels like hypothetical land, where they're kind of just like telling you stuff and it's unanchored with a fact base. I don't trust that data. And in the consulting and the psychology literature, that's called like projecting or hypothetical interviewing, where you're like, hypothetically this, and then people will be like, oh, hypothetically that. And then it's like, actually doesn't have a lot of bearing on their performance. But anything that shows a value and shows a mindset and then results in behaviors, then you're good. That's like useful data to collect, I think.
What I want to go a different direction because you guys do assessments at your firm, Geoff Smart, and so like you guys do hiring assessments, right? If I'm going to assess,
40% of our revenue is like helping pick CEOs for huge companies that are like in the news kind of thing, and 60% of what we do is coaching and developing people who want to be CEOs of big companies.
And so tell us a little bit about that. Like, what are they looking for? How accurate are they? There's a lot. I know that there's a lot of different ways to assess. Smaller companies, maybe I don't know what the ideal client. Publicly traded company is obviously a big company, but if I'm a $100 or $200 million company or a $20 million company, who's your client? And tell us a little bit about that.
So the client used to be in the early days smaller companies, and then we really just worked with like huge corporations are really fun clients because the the cost of getting it wrong is freaking huge.
Oh, huge.
And like the value of a good CEO or not moves the needle on like Brian Nickel left Chipotle, for example, is in the news and went to Starbucks. Starbucks's market cap, I think it's like a $150 billion company, moved $20 billion in one day because this guy showed up on the scene, and apparently the market thinks he's a good CEO. I've never met him. I don't know, but maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But like, so we, as an entrepreneur, I want to gravitate to where our problem solving has like the biggest impact, and that's with big companies, corporate, and then big private equity is constantly figuring out companies it's investing in, or trying to build valuable companies. Big families hire us because both they're making money on one hand and trying to give it away through their foundations to people, and it's like, let's assess these recipients of these big grants and everything. So that's kind of like the bread and butter of our business these days. But I speak to entrepreneurial audiences all the time, and it's like EO crew that like buys our Who books more than anybody. So yeah, so it works. And honestly, man, our assessments, it's just basically what's in the Who book. Like, people are often, they're like, well, no, but like, really, you're going to spend 5 hours with someone. Like, what questions do you ask yourself? It's like, it's the Who question, guys. I swear to gosh, like, we practice what we preach, but at like a forensic level. Like, I have psychology PhDs and like business experts, sitting there grinding on people for 5 hours, really understanding what they've done at every step of their career, what for every job, what were they hired to do? What do they accomplish? What did they mess up? Who'd they work with? The torque question, why they left jobs, all that. And then we do reference checks. It's just like a very thorough, it's like a 50-page report. It's very thorough. It's kind of a badge of honor. Like when people go through a SMART assessment, I mean, you're definitely about to get hired for like a great job. It's like companies don't spend money on that just for no reason. But it doesn't use psych tests. It doesn't use, like weird stuff. Like other companies do give CEOs psych tests. Like my friend Eric once, he was a really successful CEO. He was like, oh man, he's like, your field is so weird. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, like I interviewed with a competitor of yours and they gave me the psych test. And it was like, oh, it's like, this is for a sales and marketing oriented company, CEO job. The psych test they gave him asked a question: on a Friday evening, would you rather be in a library or at a cocktail party?
B.
Yeah, and he's like, cocktail party, I guess. Like, it's like you can game them. They're not good for diversity, by the way. Like, psych tests are biased, like they are. Like people act. I'm a psych PhD, right? So you'd think I'd be like pitching psych tests all day long. No way. Your best friend is to really, find real data on what people have actually done in their career, verify it with references. Like, that's gold. And other methods can be, pretty squirrely. Also giving people like in the moment. I don't know if this guy was in your EO that I spoke at, but there's an EO guy, real character. If you know who I'm talking about, please don't say their name because I'm going to say what was wrong about his hiring approach. But he was like actually at EO wearing kind of like a muscle shirt. And he was like this kind of, roided up dude who's like really aggressive. He's like, we have a really aggressive culture at my company. So we hire aggressively too. I go, yeah, is it working for you? Like, and what does that even mean? And he's like, yeah, we'll do the whole like, sell me this pen, and then he's like, and no matter what, when they, in the moment, they're trying to sell me the pen, I act like I'm not buying it. And then I test them to see how they handle failure. And I'm like, oh, wow. And he's like, yeah, you need to stress out the candidates to see what they're really made of.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
Like, great, man. I hear you, but like, is it working for you or not? And he's like, absolutely not. He's like, it is not working. People don't like it. He's like pulling that kind of thing. And the reason for that is how people act during an interview, like how they actually, if you give them like a test or that you give them like we call it almost like an audition or a work sample. That's not really that useful data because they're on their best behavior generally. And it's like, you don't know that's how they actually perform. So the whole, like the philosophical underpinnings of his method were unfortunately flawed. And by the way, like stressing people out in interviews makes them clam up and they don't want to share information. And your best friend in an interview is to have a tone of like respectful, intense curiosity where you really want to, hey, Darius, tell me more about that. Or, oh, interesting. And you reflective listen, you're intensely curious, but you're very respectful. And that's how you have a good two-way communication.
Yeah, no, I love that. So when you start thinking, that's so funny. No, I don't know the person you're talking about, but when you start thinking about, obviously your work is around building great teams and having,
Yes.
that comes from building a great hiring process, which I'm such a big fan of.
Yep.
When you start thinking about like post hiring, like how do you guys think about that? Like as far as onboarding, as far as bringing people into the organization.
What is this? The advanced class? Yeah. I mean, again, just like that class of people, or what was some stage I was on, I asked, do you have written goals? And only 10% had written goals for their people. When I've done polls from the stage, like, hey, who actually onboards people for real? And it's about like 5 or 10%, honestly, for sure. Entrepreneurs, bigger companies generally have programs for that, but entrepreneurs don't do it. What we do is we suggest, I'm talking entrepreneurs now, you sit down with the person, let's say you hired your first CFO, right? And you're like, okay, welcome CFO. Based on all of that information we talked through from your past, on all of our reference information, here's where we think you're going to be naturally really strong at this job. It's these areas and it's this kind of stuff. Here's where we think you might struggle. And you just jump right into it. Like, don't act like that's shameful, or don't act like you're like, okay, and the negative news. It's not negative news. It's positive news, because you're helping them spot the areas that are going to be tougher. And they appreciate it. If you call it right, here are your strengths, here are your areas, where you're going to want to focus a little extra in this job. I think it's a wonderful feeling for the person. They can be themselves and they can really lean into their strengths, and they can, you can just have an open conversation about like, oh, you haven't worked in this field. And so like, learning the technical stuff, like let's figure out a way to, plug that hole and like, fill that gap. Okay, great. Just making explicit strengths and areas for improvement are important in onboarding. Also narrowing the job to like narrowing the possible scope of what they think they might be hired to do. We just hired a chief human resources officer last week who's awesome. And he's super experienced. He's coming in, and it's still taking him and us energy. Of all the possible things he could focus on, what are like the 2 or 3 priorities that matter most? That's another great onboarding conversation. It's like it's like channeling human energy into a narrow set of things is way smarter than just diffusing it out. So that's the other. So strengths and weaknesses on onboarding, a collaborative conversation about priority is super important. And then around, 3-6 months in, give them some anonymous 360 feedback. Be like, hey, do you want someone to talk to a bunch of people and give you some feedback on how you're doing? And this is for like key roles. It takes energy, but for key roles, people will say, yeah, sure, that's really helpful. And then you have someone, not you, if you're the CEO or the founder. I don't like being the bearer of news like that. I like having someone else, like, yeah, just confidentially go talk to people and debrief the person on how they're doing. And then, they get to hear, oh, okay, you're doing great on this stuff. Here's some things that are kind of coming off a little weird, maybe like just be aware of it. Like, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know. Communication is the thing. That's a general term, but like, I think for onboarding is really important. Hey, at this firm, we're an email culture. Hey, at this firm, we're not an email culture. We're a pick up the phone culture. Hey, in this culture, we're about formality. Hey, at this culture, we're about speed and informality. Like they don't know when they're coming in, really. But so helping them, having a spirit of like, try stuff, try, fail, and we'll like give you feedback, I think is a wonderful onboarding spirit.
I love that, man. That's such good feedback for, especially like, I think you can, look, I was a pretty big fan of building a strong, like systematic onboarding, and you need to do that as you scale. But what you just gave was just such good practical advice that like any one manager can sit down and do in an hour, with a person. So, it's about, there's a complexity and simplicity. So,
right. And simple, you and I know this, and it's not obvious, but the simplicity is beautiful, right? Simple, clarity, 2 or 3 things. Here's what we need you to do. 1 or 2 things to focus on. Simplicity for our Power Score book, which we don't need to talk about, but it's about team effectiveness. And we studied all these variables. We had the University of Chicago crunch data on, I think it was like 10,000, 5 or 10, I don't know what it was, like 5 or 10,000 teams. And we found that teams that were good at 3 things outperformed other teams, were 20 times more likely to accomplish the goals, whatever the goals are of the team, than teams that weren't good at all 3. And it's like a triathlon. You have to be good at all 3 things. And the 3 things were being able to prioritize as a team. What are we not going to do? And then what are we going to do? That's number 1, priorities, P. Number 2 is who's on the team. So taking a very, like you and me style approach to making sure we get the right people on the bus in the right seats, to quote Jim Collins. and the right folks off the bus. That's the second skill that matters in team effectiveness. And the third one is building relationships focused on results. So it's not just having a beer, someone I like, if I'm stuck in an airport with it's not that. It's not kumbaya. It's like, hey, do we have a kind of relationship where we're focused on results and we're giving each other feedback, that kind of thing. So teams that had those three strengths, but the priorities one was really important. And only 24% of teams were rated by our expert raters as like good at prioritizing. So most aren't good.
Wow.
24% are good. And to be bad, it means just letting lots of priorities creep in. And to be good means that energy to really narrow it down to like the few that are going to drive equity value creation the most.
Yeah, I love that, man. Geoff, I could probably sit here for like 3 hours and just geek out with you. This is like
so fun.
I want to respect your time. So, anyone that wants to like connect with you, obviously we talked about a bunch of your books, the company, like how do they connect? Where do they get the books? Just like go down the list.
Yeah. I mean, like just, I don't know where I'm just Dr. Geoff Smart with a Geoff Smart on LinkedIn. They can follow. I do write pretty casual, punchy things occasionally and pump them out. But that's probably the easiest if they're CEOs of $1 billion plus revenue company, or if they're doing really well at Bain or McKinsey and want to take a look at Geoff Smart, just our website's geoffsmart.com. But thanks. I really appreciate being on the show. This was a lot of fun. Time really flew when you're having fun.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, we'll put that in the show notes, and we do actually have some larger CEOs. So if you guys, and we have a lot of private equity people that listen. So you guys know where to find our friend Geoff here. With that said, you ready for the greatness question?
I'm not ready for it, but I'm willing to try.
I think you're going to crush it. All right, Geoff, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how'd you overcome it?
Okay, appreciate the question. It's a scary question. I would say I think fear of failure is probably the number one barrier standing between me and any moments of greatness I've had in the past. And I think about right before I started my company, when I tried calling Henry Kravis up and his assistant told me to pound sand. She wasn't going to, put me through. I called her 4 times, and that was absolutely terrifying. I'm insane. Why am I calling this gatekeeper 4 times? But she said yes. We got through, and it actually really helped my business get started. I ended up seeing Henry Kravis, the actual guy, in New York just like a couple months ago. I bought him dinner.
Nice.
By the way, you were so cool to me when I was 30 years ago. And he was like, I don't remember, but I'm like, you were, trust me. So, but that fear of failure, if you push through it, like that it's hard to do, but I do think, greatness is kind of waiting for you on the other side. And pretty much, are we going to write a book? Okay, well, what if it fails? What if we put all this time into it? Nobody reads it? There's so much, pretty much everybody I know has it. You have to be pretty sociopathic to not have a fear of failure, but it's the the entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, no, I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to call it out. I'm just going to, if it feels like the right thing to do, but I'm just, worried to do it, I'm just going to push through it anyway. So I'd say for me, that's probably the biggest barrier to creating greatness is being able to overcome your fear of failure, to just go for it and try it.
I love it, man. Dr. Geoff Smart, you're a scholar, you're a gentleman. Great to see you again, my friend. Appreciate you so much for coming on our show today. So much gratitude from us here at the Greatness Machine.
Darius, this is a great podcast, and congrats on all your success.
Thank you. You guys, here we are leaders, and leaders, we share good information, and our friend Geoff was just dropping knowledge. So make sure you share this. Make sure you support him and his work. And until next time, peace out. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.